Hey, what's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the channel. That time of week again, everybody's favorite segment, the MLB Power Rankings. We are now 3 months in the book, the last day of June going on. Filming this one a few minutes late because the Astros and Mets decided to go to extra innings after a long delay there. And it was somewhat impactful on my power rankings for the week. As well as you guys know, I always film this before the Sunday Nighter, and Baltimore and Texas have just kicked off their 4th game of their series. But other than that, we're going to go over all 30 teams, going to talk briefly about how their week went, etc., etc. Before I do, if you are new to the channel, subscribe. We do this every week. We do other fun videos, and I'm looking to grow to 1,500, 2,000 subs by the end of this year. We're going to be doing more hat giveaways along the way. You must be a subscriber, follow the videos, and you might have your chance to win. We've given away maybe 4 or 5 so far since this channel started. So excited to do more of that, but let's just jump into it. And believe it or not, we have a new number 30, and we've been looking forward to the Chicago White Sox series for a number of months. It feels like I've always been previewing how it might be impactful. And Colorado almost got swept by the White Sox this weekend, which pretty much put a nail in the coffin for me that Colorado is now the lowest team in this MLB. They went to extra innings today to avoid that sweep. I think they went 14 innings, so Colorado really fighting and clawing not to be swept. They also got swept earlier in a 2-game series against Houston, so Colorado continues to be the worst team in this National League. And now that they faced the Chicago White Sox and we've seen them play 3 games, it looked like the Chicago White Sox are the better team. We also got to see the one difference maker in Crochet go for the White Sox. I think he went today, which ended up not being a big difference, but that leaves him at number 30. That somehow brings the White Sox to number 29, even though they went 0-3 against the Dodgers to start the week, coming back with a couple of wins here. We've seen them pick up some couple wins along the way, and now if we look at the overall standings and the overall record of both these teams, I think Colorado has about 3 more wins than the White Sox, but White Sox by far in a tougher division, a lot more top heavy in that division with the Royals, the Twins, and the Guardians, of course. So maybe that's accounting for a lot. The American League seems to be a lot stronger, again, accounting for a lot. So it's been fun. White Sox, I think we're in the bottom row for 8 weeks in a row. Feels like that long, but they are out, and they might stay out, but we will see. Maybe a 7-game lose streak coming their way. And number 28, we got the Miami Marlins. I think I moved them up 1 spot. Again, I talk about it every week. They did get shut out yet again this week to the Philadelphia Phillies. I think it was Friday they got shut out. But they had a tough week, and they went 3-4. They played Kansas City earlier in the week, going 1-2. And then the Phillies had a 4-game set and going 2-2 against the team that was number 1 last week. A lot of impact there. Somehow the Marlins scored 4 runs total against the Royals in the 3 games and managed to win one of the games. I think in that game they scored 2. And just absolutely no offense coming out of this Marlins team. I think realistically, offensively, they are worse than these two, but somehow they managed to be more of a battling team, it feels like. Number 27, they've been pretty much stapled in this spot. I don't think much is going to change. They've lost a lot, and it feels like a lot lately. Getting swept earlier in the week against the LA Angels, that team that they had been sitting beside at number 26 for a number of weeks. These two teams really deciding. Felt like the Angels were a little bit ahead of these bottom 4 teams, and the A's, I think, demonstrated that earlier in the week. They went 1-2 against Arizona, so really going 1-5 on the week. Not a great week for the A's. Next step for Marlins, it's starting to be who's going to be better in these two teams? Maybe the A's can be here, Marlins there, but we don't get too hung up on this bottom row, but we do have a new number 26 on the board, and the bottom 5 has been pretty much the same teams for the past 8 weeks, but the Cubs are like, hello, we're here. Let's make a statement for it. So Cubs went 1-3 against San Fran, 1-2 against Milwaukee. So a 2-5 week for the Cubs. They'd been in number 25 a couple of weeks ago for a number of weeks. And then I had San Fran in that spot, and then they go 1-3 against San Fran. Not cutting it. This offense on the Cubs just not getting too much done. And we see Kyle Hendricks get marched out week after week and continues to get exploded. And that's what the Brewers did to him today. So I think the Cubs right now, clearly the worst team in what I consider probably the weakest division in the MLB as a whole. So that puts them now into number 26. Moving up a spot, we do have the LA Angels. And I think this is a team If anyone right now is on a possibility of breaking out of this bottom row, it is the LA Angels, sweeping Oakland 3-1 against Detroit over the weekend. So we had a nice 6-1 week for the Angels. Might realistically argue that they could move up into the bottom row, but they've just been such a staple in this bottom row now for pretty much the whole season. It feels like ever since Trout has gone down, they've pretty much been down here. And I need more than just one solid winning week. I think if you look at all of these teams here across this board, you would find a couple of teams, they all have a week like this. Let's see if the Angels can do something going forward. And honestly, they're on the verge here. Number 24, just been a complete self-destruction, I think, of the Texas Rangers so far this season. I hate to say it, but 0-3 against Milwaukee earlier in the season, earlier in the week, 0-3 against Baltimore so far this week, just kicking off the fourth game. Could very well be a 7-game skid when all is said and done. The Rangers, they've tried their best to stay in the hunt. We have a Houston Astros team that has started going on the verge. Well, they just have not been able to. And we're about halfway through the season, and there's a lot of other teams that are super competitive right now. We see Corey Seager possibly go down now, too, with getting hit in that wrist. Didn't see what the outlook was for that, but if he's out, the Rangers get into even more of a spot. And I think this is setting up a very interesting debate coming forward here, is who's actually better right now? Is it the LA Angels or the Texas Rangers? Right now, I'm leaning Texas, but we're going to see these teams play a bunch down the stretch, I'm sure, so keep your eye out for that. Number 23, we've got the Cincinnati Reds. They didn't really move, and they had two interdivision matchups this week. The first one to start the week off against Pittsburgh. Both these guys started beside each other earlier in the week, and of course, Pittsburgh got the better of them, 2-1. Cincinnati then went off to play St. Louis, the hottest potential team next to the Brewers in this division. Team they're going to have to beat if they're going to want to make up ground in this wild card race, and they split that series 2-2. At least they did that. A little bit of confidence there, but they did get shut out today 2-0, I believe, and that a little bit of concern. Ellie De La Cruz seems to be like the biggest aspect of this offense that is consistently generating any sort of consistency, whereas the rest of the lineup does bring concerns, especially number 22. It's no real difference. These teams could be interchanged a lot. The big difference, of course, is Pittsburgh did win the series this week. I think they won the last one too as well, so big deal there. Pittsburgh went on to play Atlanta, a team that has struggled over the past number of weeks, and they lost that series as well. So it seems that these two teams don't really get much of win streaks going, and they don't really beat the teams that are ahead of them. They scrap pretty well when you're talking about each other, and teams blow them. And at times, they do have some monster offensive runs. Pittsburgh, to me, has the rotation that's a little bit stronger. Paul Skeens being that big staple as opposed to Cincinnati. Of course, they have some young studs themselves, but these guys are close, and it's going to be a close battle between them, I think, for the next long time. Number 21, I don't really know if I move them up or down or whatnot. It's been a pretty interesting week for the Jays. They really needed to make some progress playing Boston, playing the New York Yankees, and it was a 500 week for them. They split Boston 1-1, the third game being delayed. I think it got suspended. It might have even played a few innings. I cannot recall. Yankees series 2-2. Got to be a little bit excited about that. All of the games were complete blowouts for the most part. Double-digit scores for the winning team on pretty much every game, if not 9 runs, same thing. But like for the Jays to make progress, they needed to do better than this, and a split 500 week in their division is not going to move the needle. And now that their offense seems to get going, their pitching, on the other hand, is just falling apart. So it's really hard to figure out what this team's doing. It's almost like they're trending downwards when they should be going upwards, and they're not. Next up, number 20, a team that did do a brief visit to the bottom row last week, and they answered my criticisms with a pretty big week. 3-1 against the Cubs, team that they're pretty much regulated to that bottom row single-handedly themselves. And then this weekend, they beat the Dodgers, a team that has been a staple in the top row for a number of seasons now. And their offense somehow came alive against the Dodgers, especially today, putting up 9 runs or 10 runs when all is said and done. I know 9 by the halfway point. But San Francisco trying to stick around here in the wild card race in the National League is tight. Like, we're looking at number 23, and they are by far not out of this race whatsoever. San Francisco did a decent job this week. Want to see this translate into some more division wins. They've always played their division very strong. San Diego, Arizona, never an easy out when they're playing San Francisco. So it's going to be interesting if they start building on this momentum. We could see them start to build up this board. It's one of those teams that visited the bottom row, and maybe I was a little bit too harsh, but realistically, any of these teams we've talked about so far has had an argument to be in that point. Number 19, I think they're one of the most free-falling teams on the board as of late. The Detroit Tigers just had another pretty awful week. 1-2 against Philadelphia, 1-3 against the LA Angels. And what was a peak performance of Detroit around 11-10, it seems like the just consistency on this team has not been there. And Riley Green is like the only offensive player that has any step on whatsoever of being an all-star, in my opinion. On the rotation side, they have a couple of interesting guys that have helped keep this team afloat. But long story short, they have no depth whatsoever to be able to compete. Some of these teams below them probably have stronger depth. And if the season starts to carry on a little bit longer, and Detroit doesn't have some of these younger guys, some of these other guys step up in their batting order, we're going to see them be probably back down here where they have been for the past number of years. Number 18, a team that has just, this is probably going to be around where they're going to peak for the season. A lot of other teams starting to make progress. Well, they've been pretty much status quo. A little bit below 500 majority of the season. We saw times where like maybe they're going to make it to 500, but then other teams that were around the 500 mark used them as a little springboard. San Diego played them earlier this week, 3-0. San Diego swept them, and then they played Tampa Bay this weekend, another team that at times was in this bottom row, another area that Washington is all too familiar with. Washington fell that series 2-1. Tampa Bay has been one of those hotter teams, and they are our number 17. They are probably one of the most breakout teams so far this week. Moving on up the board, they had, I think, fell as low as 24, maybe about a month ago, but slowly chipping away. Believe it or not, I saw them at 500. It was either today or a couple days ago, but that 500 honestly caught me by off guard. 2-1 against Seattle, 2-1 against Washington. Seattle, not been a team that has been relatively good as of late, but always a strong team, especially when it comes to their rotation. You don't really look at Tampa Bay as having a team full of bats and getting offense going. It's usually the pitching that gets it done. And they went 4-2 this week against two teams that have been middling to higher up echelon teams. So they're going to build off this, and 500 not going to be good enough in this American League to make it into the playoffs, but it's going to be good enough to keep you in that top half of the MLB and at least fighting for that playoff spot. Number 16, do have the Arizona Diamondbacks, 1-2 against Minnesota, 2-1 against Oakland. So at least they're doing their job against a team like Oakland. So you got to be a little excited about that. Arizona's starting to get their stuff sorted out. We saw Zach Gallen have a good outing this week and some other good aspects around them. Just a lot of inconsistencies in terms of their scoring, and we see days where they're throwing up massive double-digit offense, and you got to be pretty excited about that. Carroll, is he going to be able to get back to that form that we were used to last year? It'll be a big part of whether they can move up into this playoff race. A 500 week is not going to be good enough to stay in this spot. Definitely when you have a team like Tampa Bay fighting for it, and these other teams, while some are struggling, they can do the same similar 500 stuff week after week. It's not like it's crazy to do in the second bottom row, so you need to start putting some winning weeks together. I don't know what their schedule looks like coming forward, but it's going to be pretty impactful. Number 15, it's been a pretty good couple of weeks for the New York Mets, and as I said at the start of this video, I was kind of waiting for that series to end with Houston. They went to extras. They end up losing this series 2-1, but they got to be somewhat excited, Billy, on it, because they had a big 2-game set against the New York Yankees earlier in the week where they put up a lot of runs, and their offense has started to really pick up in an offense that we were pretty much unheard of, at least for the beginning of the season, if not last year as well. So the Mets building off that. I like what I've seen over them. Now let's keep building on it, because we're starting to get into some teams that have shown that they are winning teams earlier in the season, but some of them are starting to falter. Not this team, though. This 14 is another team that had a really slow start. These two teams are somewhat similar, different sides of the coin, right? The Astros now at 500, making a case that they're going to take this American League West. I would not be surprised if they start gaining ground there. We're going to see some fun games between them and Seattle coming on up, but Houston, building off of that win, they also swept Colorado in a 2-game set earlier in the week as well. So this team has been one of the hottest. These two, probably the hottest over the past 6-7 weeks, of course. Number 13, So this is another category of team that I had in the hot category at least a couple of weeks ago. They're starting to cool off a little bit. They went 2-1 against Atlanta this week, and then 2-2 against Cincinnati. So winning week, and a team that was in the top 2 rows, a little bit of a stumble here and wasn't super confident and happy with what I saw in that series with Cincinnati. Sonny Gray got beat up a little bit, and you want to have Sonny Gray have good outings and keep this team on its winning ways. Winning week, but at the same time, if you're in the top 2 rows, you got to put up monster winning weeks sometimes. And definitely when you have teams like San Diego, who had a 5-game win streak at one point in there. They went 3-0 against Washington to start the week, and then they played Boston, a team that I've ranked pretty high on this board consistently over the season so far. 2-1 series there. Avoided getting the sweep against San Diego today, and they maintained, in my opinion, number 11. I didn't quite put San Diego above them. I know this series just ended and San Diego had the best of them, but San Diego was probably a little bit farther down, and basically Boston staying in the exact same spot. Boston did have a pretty slow week, only a 5-game week. Talked about it already with Toronto, split series. And not too much to build off. I don't like to move teams too much drastically when they only have 5-game weeks. So that's kind of why Boston's staying there. Number 10, avoiding the free fall after last week. I had them as one of the biggest losers last week. They really bounced back this week. Started a strong series against Miami. Would have loved to see a sweep in Miami, but Miami has been playing pretty hard, especially against some of these top teams. 2 games to 1 there. But the big story this week for Kansas City, and what really elevated them back in my books to the top 10, 3 games to 1 against Cleveland Guardians, a team that I had in the top 2 last week and had just come off a big series win against the Baltimore Orioles. So nice bounce back for Kansas City after it's been a somewhat slow number of weeks, but it's nice to see. Number 9, I got Atlanta Braves 1-2 against St. Louis, 2-1 against Pittsburgh. 500 week for Atlanta. Didn't really have anything with them to really demonstrate that should move them up, especially on a 500 week. Probably not going to move them up when there's other teams ahead of them that in my books are quite stronger. But I wasn't ready to move them down because these 2 teams that were the most on their tail in my books didn't have the kind of week that put them ahead of Atlanta. San Diego may be the team that's threatening them the most, and St. Louis as well. Like I said, St. Louis did win that series, but wasn't confident in how St. Louis came back after winning that series to follow it up with the Cincinnati one. So really these 5 teams, maybe even going down to here, are relatively close. You could probably interchange most of them into the top 9. But right now I'm kind of giving the edge to Atlanta. Most of it is built off the week before and the week before that. They had been one of the hotter teams going in. Number 8, dropping maybe 1 or 2 spots. They were hot for so long, so I'm not going to hold too much. It was a losing week. 1-2 against Tampa, 1-2 against Minnesota. Didn't get any swept, so it's always good when your team is avoiding the sweep, especially when you're going through some struggling times, which seems to be going on in Seattle. They had their chance to maybe win the series today. At one point, they were down, tied it up, but just didn't pull it together in time. Seattle at number 8, I think, is relatively fair. I think we're starting when you're at number 8. We're looking at teams that are drastically ahead of the rest. Especially 8 and above, I would be shocked if any of these teams do miss the playoffs, whereas 9 and below would not shock me. Number 7, they're making a case to get in this top row. I debated it a little bit this week. Their offense seems to be really popping off. 2-1 against Arizona, 2-1 against Seattle. Got 2 middling teams that they're up against, and Royce Lewis has just been an absolute monster for this team ever since he came back. They really missed him, and it's been like a godsend that he came back. Watching this rotation, they're getting it done too. They're on the verge of breaking through. A lot of these teams in this top row have been staples in their majority of the season. Minnesota don't think has been in there. If they were there, it would have been early April, but it's been a while. So I think if we keep this up, and some of these other teams, there has been some struggling in this top row as of late, but not nearly as much struggling as we had seen from Minnesota in that past. Number 6, I do have the LA Dodgers 3-0 against the White Sox, so that's what you like to see. But to follow it up against a division rival that has been in days one of the weaker teams in this division, in this conference, losing that series, I was not ecstatic about that. They're definitely missing a little bit of Mookie Betts in this lineup right now. In the rotation, watching Paxton get blown up today does have concerns. Like if some of these guys are not pitching like Cy Young level, which you would really want to see at the LA Dodgers. I know some of these guys are going to be coming back for them, but some of these other teams, same kind of story. Like New York Yankees, number 5. I couldn't put them anywhere else. They seem to be a little bit of a struggle as of late. 0-2 against the Mets, 2-2 against Toronto. 2-4 weekends. Feels like a couple of weeks now that it's just not been the same Yankees team that we are used to. Of course, we know this team has barely lost any series throughout the year, so I'm not going to hold, I guess, too much against them. But right now, if I put the Yankees against any of these top 4 teams, I would be thinking that these top 4 teams would be the favorites. Number 4, one of the hottest teams in the MLB right now, we have the Milwaukee Brewers, 3-0 against Texas, 2-1 against the Cubs, 5-1 against weaker teams in a division that they're starting to build a lead on. And that's exactly what you want to be in the top of the power rankings, building your lead, getting ready for the playoffs. At this rate, in my opinion, they could potentially make a case that they're going to get that second bye in the National League. Of course, it might help that their division is a little bit easier per se than the Dodgers. But I think if we match these two teams up for a best of 7, I might think that Milwaukee's a little bit stronger. Shout out to Tommy who called it that 5 grand slams in the past 8 games for Milwaukee as well. So just some fun stuff we're hearing in our Discord that helps me throw out some random facts for these teams. So I appreciate you for that. Number 3, I do have the Baltimore Orioles sticking at number 3. And this is where it started to get a little tough for me. The top 3 teams, I think, were in a league of their own right now. And I kept Baltimore in number 3. They went 1-2 against Cleveland to start the week. And they really bounced back from that against Texas so far. 3-0 and playing right now. But 5-game losing streak. Now they're on a 4-game winning streak. It's like what you want to see out of a top team, showing that they can have what it takes to really bounce back. I think the main difference between them and number 2 right now that I had was just the fact that Guardians, they were number 2 last week. They won the series against the O's. There was a great series, a lot of close games between those two. They did win it. I actually thought about even dropping the Guardians back down due to their series loss to Kansas City, but it's one series, and I didn't want to hold that one series against them, even though it's an intense, important division rival like the Royals. Their offense fell a little quiet in this week. Even against the Orioles, they didn't need a whole lot of runs to win some of their games, and then it fell quiet against the Kansas City Royals. I want to see what the Guardians can do. It was always a concern that they didn't necessarily play the best against these top row teams, but they have been quite strong. So I'm going to give them number 2 for at least one more week. And the same kind of thing for the Philadelphia Phillies, who remain number 1 on this board. 2-1 against Detroit, 2-2 against Miami. So that series, I got a little bit of concerns against splitting a series with a team like Miami, a team that gets at least one shutout against them every week is a little bit concerning, but they didn't lose. And they won the earlier one again against a struggling team. So a little quiet week, nothing super awesome for Philadelphia Phillies, but they continue to show that they are a top team. I know they've lost to the Baltimore Orioles in a series, so like arguably you could probably even put the Orioles as number 1, but right now I think the fact that the Phillies have such a large gap in this division, potentially a pretty large gap for the number 1 seed in the National League, I feel like it's going to be hard to catch them. I think that does edge them up a little bit over these 2 other teams. Let me know what you guys think. Where am I out to lunch on this? Some of these are probably way different from what you guys. I'd like to hear what you guys think in the comments below, so let me know. Otherwise, guys, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you for that next video.